Please be advised, viewer discretion is strongly recommended. None of the content presented here has been exaggerated or taken out of context. What you are about to hear includes the exact statements from the prosecution's closing arguments in the federal trial against Sean Diddy Combs. In today's video, you'll hear the prosecution team's final attempt to persuade the jury, highlighting key evidence, testimonies, and critical moments from the trial. Some language has been censored to comply with YouTube's guidelines. This is a voiced-over reading of real courtroom dialogue, based on live reporting from courtroom journalist Inner City Press on X.com. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Listen at your own discretion. Today in the Diddy trial, the prosecution began their closing arguments, making their final push to convince the jury that Sean Diddy Combs is guilty.
Over the last few weeks, you've learned that Sean Combs is the leader of a criminal organization. He doesn't take no for an answer. He's into kidnapping, arson, forced labor, bribery of a security officer, and the brutal crimes of the sex trafficking. Consider two moments. March 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel. The defendant got violent with Cassie. You saw what happened. He dragged her back to the freak-off. 2024 at Jane's house. The defendant choked and hit her. She ran, couldn't get away. These are chapters in the same book. The defendant counted on silence and shame. He thought that his fame and wealth and power put him above the law. Over the last 7 weeks, you've heard how he used his staff to promote his power. No one could stop him. We'll talk about RICO, including sex trafficking and transportation for prostitution, which are also separately charged as standalone crimes. You may have heard of racketeers. When someone commits crime as part of a group, they are more dangerous. A group of people whose purpose was to serve and protect the defendant. It's his kingdom. Everyone was there to serve him, fulfilling all of his desires, including his sexual desires. We need to show at least 2 racketeering crimes. The defendant was the head of the Combs enterprise. There was an inner circle, his chief of staff and his bodyguards. The names changed, but the roles remained the same. You've heard about KK, Combs' right brain. She lived in 2-star. She communicated with the defendant's girlfriends. His security, you heard their names. D-Rock, Bonds, Rube, Uncle Paulie, Fahim. They were armed and ready. Remember the incident at the diner with Suge Knight? David James told you Combs had guns. In the search, law enforcement found guns, including a rifle with the serial number defaced in L.A., 2 AR-15s with their serial numbers cut out in the defendant's closet. You also have the rotating cast of assistants paid by the defendant's business. Brendan Paul said he made $100,000 a year. KK made 6 times that. When your boss asks you to buy drugs, you're committing a crime. When you kidnap someone, or locked his girlfriend in a hotel room after your boss stomped on his face, it's a crime. The law does not require us to know that they like committing these crimes. You saw KK chiding the defendant to not be so reckless, but she got him cash, drugs. She was a member of the enterprise. It impacted interstate commerce. Minimal is fine. Combs knowingly became a member. He was the boss. He was the through line. The racketeering acts, distribution of drugs, kidnapping, arson, bribery, facilitating sex trafficking of Cassie and Jane, forced labor, travel for commercial sex, cover up. You only need to find that someone would commit 2 acts in any of these categories. It could be 2 acts of drug distribution, 1 kidnapping, just 2. You have far more than 2. Let's start with drugs, an essential ingredient of freak-offs. The most involved were D-Rock, KK, and Fahim, but others helped keep the drug supply high. We are not talking about marijuana, but what Brendan Paul called hard drugs. There are stipulations of the drugs found in the searches: cocaine, meth, oxy, ketamine, a dissociative drug, GHB, mushrooms, Molly, 2C, a combination dyed pink. It's 1305 and 1306. The quantities are not relevant. It's not an element of this crime. Distribution does not require a sale. You know the names of the drug dealers by now. Guido, One Stop, Baby Girl. Jane told you that on 2 occasions she was told to bring drugs when she flew to meet him. She coordinated with KK. It's corroborated by text messages. KK told Jane to swing by Mapleton to pick up the Guido package. He was called during hotel nights, so we know what the Guido package was, more ecstasy. The security team knew what it was. Guido texted Fahim. Puff has a $450 balance with me. Brendan Paul asked for $780 for personal Gucci items. That is, hard drugs. Drugs were distributed. It doesn't matter he wasn't buying kilos or selling them. Personal use is just a distraction. They bought and distributed to people around him. Cassie used drugs at every freak-off, supplied by the defendant. He introduced Jane to drugs, gave them to her at all but one hotel night. He gave drugs to Carrie Morgan and Bonna Bonolin. He made Brendan Paul try Tusi to see if it was good. D-Rock would text, "One stop, need to see someone for bro." That is, the defendant. Guido asked Fahim to cover the defendant's drug debt. KK knew he was distributing drugs to the woman for the Wild King nights. Jane told KK she was having a bad come-down. KK gives pro tips how to deal with it. Plain and simple, this is drug distribution. How about kidnappings? They committed them under both California and New York law. Consider Cassie. Bond made her stay put. The defendant called Cassie a slut. He stopped on her face. She was disfigured. Roger Bonds caught her and brought her back. The defendant made her go to the London hotel on Sunset, so no one saw her. She wanted to go home to her mom, but no. It's clear Cassie did not consent to staying in the London hotel. David James testified the defendant demanded to see his search history if he had posted that the defendant assaulted Cassie in the club. Then there's Capricorn Clark. They made her take a lie detector test for days in an empty office building in Manhattan. This was in 2004. She was holding expensive jewelry that went missing. Uncle Paulie took her to the future HQ of Bad Boy. She was tested for 5 lies. The man administering the test told her if she failed, she'd end up in the East River. In Central Park, the defendant told her if anything happened, he'd have to kill her. David James remembers this. He was tested too, to get the rat out of the team. In December 2011, Rube helped the defendant kidnap Capricorn Clark. It started on December 22, 2011. The defendant banged on Capricorn's door with a gun. He was out for revenge. He barked an order at Capricorn. "Get dressed, we're gonna kill Cootie." They drove to Kid Cootie's house. The defendant had a gun in his lap. This was kidnapping. He moved her a substantial distance. The defendant said he wouldn't let her told until she brought him Cassie, who he kicked when she arrived, into fetal position. Cassie, who was with Kid Cootie that morning, testified with this. The officer who responded to the 911 call, he saw a black Escalade registered to Bad Boy. Then, on January 12, 2012, the defendant had Kid Cootie's car set on fire, arson. Someone cut a hole in the roof of Kid Cootie's car and dropped in a Molotov cocktail. We're not suggesting the defendant cut the hole. He didn't even buy his own soup, you heard the voice notes. He said he was going to blow up Kid Cootie's car. What are the odds? He says it, and it happened. The coincidences just keep on coming. The defendant and Rube just happened to be there a few weeks before. Kid Cudi was driving the same Porsche the night of the trespass. What are the odds? Kid Cudi had conflicts with no one except the defendant. Then D-Rock brought Kid Cudi to the defendant, who was looking like a Marvel supervillain. Years later, the defendant apologizes to Kid Cudi. Then there's Bribery, the 2016 video. The defendant was having a freak-off with Cassie and one of the escorts, Jules. Flores found the defendant sitting in a chair with what he called a devilish stare. In the room, he saw another man. The defendant tried to hand Flores a stack of money. It was his first attempt at a bribe that day. As Cassie leaves, Combs starts damage control. He called Cassie over a dozen times. The texts, "Call me, cops are here." He was just manipulating her. But the defendant knew he could be arrested. There was video of the assault. He went and banged on Cassie's door with a hammer. Neighbors were going to call the police. They did in fact go. Carrie Morgan had the LAPD card. KK suggests, say they had a fun drunk night. She calls and reaches Eddie Garcia. Eddie says no. Then KK shows up in person. He won't show her, but says off the record, it's bad. KK has the defendant call Eddie on his personal cell phone. Once Eddie says his boss will do it for $50,000, the defendant calls him Eddie my angel. That's how he's saved in the cell phone. Eddie goes to deliver the USB. D-Rock and KK are there. The defendant counted out dollar by dollar the bribe. Eddie told you the security guard told him he came up with the defendant. That was D-Rock. Eddie asked the defendant, what if Cassie calls police? So, the defendant knew. Eddie finds the ID of stand-in for Flores. NDAs are signed. Don't speak to anyone. Paying for silence is influencing testimony. In their opening, the defense suggested it was just about bad publicity. Police involvement would hurt him. The two are connected. The next racketeering predicate is sex trafficking. Defendants' inner circle assisted, whether they wanted to or not. Threats, drugs, lies, and illegal violence to make them have sex with escorts. This is not an attempt to criminalize dysfunctional relationships or personal sexual behavior. They did not want to have sex with strangers while the defendant masturbated. They were covered in oil and sore over and over again. We are not asking you to find that every hotel night or freak off was sex trafficking, or even the majority. You only need to find the elements were met one time, one freak off. That's it. He's guilty. But it was way more than once. Let's start with Jane. Turn off the public screens. Consider the sobriety party. And in Jane's house. Let's start with the love bombing stage. Jane was head over heels. They traveled to the Caribbean. Dr. Hughes talked about this. She never met with any witness, but it was like she knew them. Love bombing is a tactic. He was grooming her. He gave Jane ecstasy. She fell to the ground, convulsing. The defendant liked baby oil and red lights. Then introduced in May 2021, she wanted to please her partner. She was high. The defendant had a freak-off set up that very night. An escort came. Jane was excited by that first experience. She didn't realize she had opened Pandora's box. It became 90% of their relationship. For a while, she went along. Then she told him she wanted it to stop. There are texts about this. Jane wrote, "I wanted to do things outside these rooms, to travel with you." The defendant ignored Jane's discomfort. Those hotel nights were not about what Jane wanted. They were about what the defendant wanted to see. He decided how long. Jane said, if she was going to have sex with strange men, she should choose which. The defendant made her ask them for nude photos. These were not for her. When she asked to use condoms, the defendant was not happy. He was dismissive and condescending. She would try to have it go faster. He'd order her to slow down. It was about what he wanted. He dangled carrots. He gave her gifts and money. He lied to her repeatedly. She asked, "When are we doing a getaway?" He said they'd go on a yacht, but didn't. Here's what Jane wrote in her notes app. "I don't want to have you use me to fulfill your freaky wild desires in hotel rooms." He used his payment of her rent as leverage. The carrot turned into a stick. She wrote, "The threats and innuendo are non-stop." He paid for her veneers because he didn't like her teeth, then said, "Look at the roof over her head and your pretty mouth and teeth." He wanted the all-star party, sex with 3 men. She sent him a photo of her period blood. He sent this voice note,
"I'm about to really disappear on you. I don't have no time for this, baby girl. You got me on my job. You got to get on your job."
The message couldn't be clearer, not going to take no for an answer. After reading Cassie's lawsuit, Jane writes to the defendant, "I feel like I'm reading my own sexual trauma. 2 of my birthdays you forced me." Jane wrote, "You gaslit me. It was sexual exploitation you framed as love for your sick fetishes." The defendant called her and tried to trick her into saying it was all consented to. He fed her a false narrative. "Listen to this clip." He talked over her. "Dr. Hughes told you how a victim is trauma bonded to her abuser." Jane often felt the defendant didn't listen to the truth. She said, "Sean would say just to move on." He told her to charge him, that lawyers would be involved, to buy her silence. So she asked for $100,000 a year for her to move on. She thought it was reasonable, far less than Cassie. The defendant went ballistic. She refused to adopt her false narrative. You can read the text message. Jane wrote that the defendant was going to show her sex tapes to the father of her child. Then he reached out and told her to come see him in Miami. She makes it clear he doesn't want a hotel night. He says, "Okay." Despite his promise, he called an escort. Here are more threats about the rent. Jane writes, "I hate worrying about the rent." This is in 2024. It all culminated in June 2024. He assaulted her and forced her to perform oral sex on an escort. This is sex trafficking. It was interstate, and the Astroglide crossed state lines. The defendant knew or recklessly disregarded that force. Threats of force, coercion, or fraud were used. Consenting once doesn't mean she consented every time. One time is enough. In 2023, he made Jane feel she'd have a proper NYC weekend, but invited escorts. Jane sent him another message. It's dark and sleazy, in fear of losing my home. His response, girl, stop. Then he FaceTimed her and told her about stopping and dinner. He lied. Look.
Public screen is still off for summary chart.
He is also texting Paul Arthur as escort. Look at these messages. He is setting up a hotel night. When she is in the air, he tells her he has a surprise for her. She did not want it. That, before the plane even lands, is a completed act of sex trafficking. He tricked her. Then, under coercions, she calls Cabral to come to New York. In the next text, she says, in NYC, I knew you would pair me up with a random person. In the sobriety party, without drugs, she is so disgusted she vomits. She writes, I'm not a porn star. I'm not an animal. I need a break. The defendant responds, let's spend the day. No strangers. She replies, you'll love bomb me. He switches from carrot to stick, the house. He texts, are you going to let me into our house? 8 times. Then he said he was sick and needed her. She went and had sex with 3 different men without drugs. After vomit, he said, get back out there. 2024 in Jane's house. 3 months after Homeland Security agents searched the defendants' homes. They used Jane's house. He came there. They were supposed to have a fun date night. They drank and argued. She pushed his head into the counter. He shouted at her. She told him to leave. She ran and closed doors. He kicked down 3 doors. You saw the doors. Here's one of them on the screens.
Public screens are still off.
She ran without shoes. She hid. He was waiting. Jane hit the defendant. He punched her in the face. Here are photos. He dragged her by the hair back into the house. Jane took his phone and called the other woman. She shouted. The defendant called Jonathan Perez. He followed her into the shower and hit her, knocked her down. He called Anton the escort and told her to have sex with him. She put on makeup to hide her injuries. She drove to pick up Anton at the gate. Then the defendant said, take this fucking pill. He put his face inches from her and asked, is this coercion? He was brazenly acknowledging he was breaking the very same law he violated before. Jane didn't want to have sex with the escort that night. She said no, but he wouldn't take no as an answer. Jane performed oral sex until Anton ejaculated. The defendant told this security to bring cash to Anton. They didn't have it. The next day he gave Jane the money to pay Anton. She Ubered the bag of money over to him. This was coercion.
At this point, they take a break, and then they continue.
Let's go back. The 3 nights were part of a buildup, from fraud to coercion to finally force. The house was just an example of defendant's financial coercion of Jane. Also drugs. They came a necessary part of sex. Jane told you about Miami in 2024. He gave her liquid Molly. They showed you video. They'll argue that she was super into it. But she was super high. His coercion included threats to release tapes of her having sex in the hotel rooms. Combs threatened to send sex tapes to Jane's child's father. This was to coerce her into more commercial sex acts. The defense has suggested that Jane agreed to these hotel nights. Let's talk about what agreeing means. Theirs is an incomplete picture. Let's turn to Volume 2. We're going to talk about Cassie, with several examples. You know from sitting through this trial that force was not limited to these days. Through the decade they were together, he forced her to have sex with escorts. Cassie was 19. He was in his late 30s. He signed her to a 10-record deal. He took her on a yacht and gave her ecstasy. They had sex. They were in a relationship. She had just turned 21. The defendant was her boss, who called all the shots. He molded her. He told Capricorn, let me show you, then ordered Cassie around. She did it, walk and turn around. Total compliance. He didn't take no for an answer. He was abusive, physical, emotional, psychological, sexual. They want you to call this domestic violence. But he was forcing her to have freak-offs. He controlled everything. He demanded that her nails be done a certain way, on red carpets. The Vanity Fair party in 2014, Deontay Nash told you. He shouted. Combs shouted, I thought I told y'all she had to have her hair up. He wouldn't let her make money from her music. She was offered the chance to do a common video. Puff said, no. He paid for her car, clothing, phones, and vacation. He made her dependent. He did it to her family, too. After he found out she was with Kid Cudi, he demanded $20,000 from her parent to pay him back, or he'd release sex tapes. That month, in just this account, he had $3.2 million coming in and out. This was about control. Remember what Dr. Hughes said. When a victim is on unsure footing, the abuser has control. He punched her, kicked her, dragged her. When it was bad, he hid her in hotels to heal and not be seen. You saw photos and video. D-Rock, Rube, Paulie, they knew. He attached her for attending a Prince party until Prince's security intervened. Mia and Myra Morales described abuse to you. Cassie told you, when she got to the house, he threatened to release the sex tapes. He assaulted her in Jamaica. He beat her up in Las Vegas while she was curled up under the toilet. She said, D-Rock cried. There was his assault at the Intercontinental Hotel, caught on tape. For Cassie, it was her normal. She was there when he attached Mia, Devontae Nash, and Banna. Banna may have gotten the date wrong, but she had injured. One time he has Cassie told guns for him, the diner and Suge Knight incident. Cassie was in the house. She saw. Why didn't she leave? Ms. Hughes explained that hitting leads to fear. Even when Cassie was in South Africa, she could not get away. KK kept calling. D-Rock was loyal only to the defendant. He played both sides. He talked to Cassie, then reported it back to the defendant. She about to ice up. I told her to chill out. They met for dinner in Malibu. Then he raped her on the living room floor. She said no. She cried. But he didn't take no for an answer. He raped her. He wrote, I could tell I didn't turn you on yesterday. That is, he raped her. Because of the trauma bond, after the rape, she met him at a friend's party, then had sex. Consensual sex. This was a trauma bond. He had an M.O., an hours-long performance. He masturbated and sometimes filmed. Just like with Jane, sometimes the defendant told escort to urinate on her. Sometime he urinated himself. Why? To turn himself on. She began drug addicted. Here she wrote, I love our FOs when we both want it. Jurors, this is not an all or nothing situation. There were times he knew she didn't want to do it. That is sex trafficking. She obviously didn't want to have an escort urinate in her mouth while she lay on the floor. Let's talk about the videos. You've seen clips. You don't see weapons. You see her having sex, masturbating. The defendant is moving the camera around, at times focuses on the escort, not Cassie at all. It's clear this was about his fantasy, not Cassie's. March 5th, 2016 in the Intercontinental Hotel, the video. Before the Intercontinental Hotel, Cassie had a premiere. It was a big night for her. She agreed to a freak-off as damage control. Look at this, she says. I don't want you thinking I don't want to. She knows the defendant won't take a no for an answer. The defendant gets Jules to come. You know what happens. An argument, the defendant hits Cassie in the face. All she can think about is her premiere. She takes off without her shoes.
Now the Intercontinental video shown.
He throws her to the ground. He kicks her, then drags her back to the room where Jules is waiting. Why is the dragging relevant? Because Jules is there. Freak-offs have multiple sessions. They were between sessions. He leaves her, but he takes her bags. But she doesn't follow him. Instead, Cassie is using the phone in the elevator lobby. The defendant is making another conscious decision, to take the bags into the room, then come back for Cassie with his hands free. He grabs her phone, then makes the decision to stay. He stays even though he is in a towel and looks ridiculous. After Flores arrives, he stalls in the hall. He knows Jules is still on the room, possibly naked. The defense claims he took back drugs that day, but you can see he is in control. Cassie just wanted to get her bag and phone and leave. The defendant offered Flores money. This is a photo of Jane in the car back to her house, with sunglasses, her black eye. He was using force to get Cassie to continue with the freak-off. The defense may tell you the violence was not connected to the sex, but it was an attempt to get Cassie to continue with the freak-off. Later she wrote to him, I'm not a rag doll, I'm someone's child. There were freak-offs in New York with Daniel Phillip. Daniel Phillip was not paid for his time. This is a ridiculous argument. In one freak-off, between session, the defendant told Cassie to come in the bedroom. She kept using the computer. The defendant threw a bottle, dragged her, then slapped her. Daniel Phillip heard Combs yell, "Bitch, when I tell you to come here, you come here." After that, Daniel Phillip could not perform. But a completed act is not required for sex trafficking. This is sex trafficking. Cannes, they were at the film festival. The defendant accused Cassie of stealing his drugs. He threw her off the boat they were staying on. Mia heard an audio of this, recognized the voices. They flew back to NY. She traded seats to get away, but he followed and showed her freak-off videos. He threatened to release the sex tapes. When they got to New York, they had a freak-off. This is another example of clear-cut coercion. He threw her off a boat without her passport. He wanted Cassie to be afraid to say no to him. Cassie said, "I didn't know what no would mean, what no would turn into." He could be violent. The defense said Cassie made a choice every day to stay with him. Step back. Imagine yourself as Cassie. This was the force. This was the leverage. There were the drugs, dissociative and numbing. She needed that buffer. Yes, some of the messages are explicit. That doesn't mean she wanted to have sex with escort at freak-offs. In 2009, he wrote, "You're supposed to be seducing me all day." Cassie told the defendant she didn't want to do freak-offs. Take her birthday party, Deonte told you about. He demanded she freak off, and she did. What choice did Cassie have in the end? She did not have the freedom to make voluntary adult choices. Let's go back to count one for a minute. While it was the defendant in the freak-offs, but he had help from KK, D-Rock, Fahim. They knew it was wrong. How did they facilitate? KK got strange men access to rooms the defendant and Cassie shared. KK got Clayton Howard, Dave, access to the room. Jonathan Perez found the video of Cassie having sex with an escort. He showed it to KK. She knew. Fahim saw it too. Fahim got drugs to the defendant even during the freak-offs, between sessions. On February 18, 2024, after Jane told KK, KK still sent stuff for Wild King nights. D-Rock iced Cassie's black eyes. It would be absurd to think D-Rock didn't know what they were doing. Of course he knew. I expect the defense will say they didn't know. David James saw a stranger. Deonte Nash saw one. Jonathan Perez saw video of Jane having sex with another man while the defendant watched. Interstate travel for prostitution. The defendant paid escorts. He caused the travel. He sometimes booked it. The transportation counts do not require force, fraud, or coercion. Even if all consented, we know that's not true. It's still a crime. It's just knowing transportation with the intent the individual engage in prostitution. For count 3, freak-offs involving Cassie, the escort's travel was often booked by travel agents. She remembered Dave, Clayton Howard. He would travel from New York to Miami or LA. Another escort traveled to Ibiza, GX1402. This was Jules Theodore at the London Hotel in New York City. The defendant asked for Jules's name for the ticket. The defendant's Amex show he paid for a car. There's the $2,000 bill from the London hotel. The defendant texted, "I will tip you." For what? Sex. For this incident alone, the defendant is guilty under count 3. But there's more Jules at the London hotel, starting at 7 a.m. Consider this. Paul going to Turks. The defendant says, "How should I pay?" He paid for Paul's travel to Turks for sex. Here, Reggie flew from Las Vegas to LA for sex. He is never tired. Jane sent $1,100 via Cash App. Here is the hotel folio. $4,000 of damage. The hotel staff found bodily fluids on the floor. It couldn't be clearer. Every time KK helped arrange travel for the Wild King nights, she was part of the crime. She may not have liked it, but she did it. KK sent up travel for a Wild King night in Vegas. Combs' voice.
The wildest Wild King night in Vegas?
KK knows. KK helped Cabral book his travel. Combs asks her for cash. She knows exactly what is going on. She facilitated travel for the escorts. Each is a racketeering act. You only need to find 2 acts. Just here, there are dozens.
At this point, they take another break, and then they continue.
I expect the judge will instruct you on forced labor. You heard of forced labor of 4 women, Cassie and Jane, and Mia and Capricorn. Cassie and Jane, it was grueling sexual services. Cassie called them grueling, up to 4 days, maybe even more. Jane said the same thing. Cassie and Jane were on call to perform freak-offs for the defendant whenever he wanted, wherever he wanted. He used force or threats of force. He would say, "Let's finish on a high note. Let's push through. You're not tired, are you?" It took weeks to recover for these freak-offs. That's forced labor. KK kept setting up hotel rooms and flights. Let's turn to Mia. She worked for Combs, finally at Revolt. She went 5 days without sleep. Combs sexually assault her. He put his hand up her dress. He came into her bedroom and penetrated her. He came into the closet and forced her to perform oral sex on him. There was a time in the bathroom of the private jet she can't fully remember. Repeated traumatic events. She was clear as a bell even under cross-examination. She performed labor and services, including sexual services. He threw her against a wall and slammed a door on her arm. She saw violence at Prince's party, and on Turks, when they were in South Africa. KK told Mia, if you don't call him in 10 minutes, you don't have a job. He has all the power and control. She knew she couldn't say no, even to little things. Mia knew that her job was to protect the defendant. HR was for Combs. She couldn't go to the police due to Combs' power. The threats left her with no options. I expect you're going to hear that she could have left, that she told Combs she loved him. Mia pulled no punches. There were high highs and low lows. Capricorn Clark had an issue with overtime. She took the issue to the head of HR, Vashta Wilson. But HR was the defendant's puppet. The defendant and Uncle Paulie threatened her in Central Park, and the lie detector, and taken to Kid Cudi. Capricorn had a son to provide for. Combs threatened to blacklist her. Now, witness tampering and obstruction after Cassie filed her lawsuit. This weaves the whole story together. Jane wrote, "You gaslit me." She posed a problem for the defendant. So Combs called Jane. The calls were recorded on KK's phone. You can listen to them. On November 19th, 2023, Cassie's lawsuit was already settled, but he is afraid of a criminal investigation. He calls and asks, "What can I do to make you feel better?" He says, "I can't be speaking on the phone." He is worried the U.S. will get 3 years of his text messages with Jane. While he's recording the call, he tries to convince her she was willing. He says, "We just did some kinky shit I thought we both enjoyed." Do you hear, on the recorded call, the sound of notes being taken with a Sharpie to plan how to get what they want Jane to say? You've seen that in this trial, the lawyers passing notes to each other. Do you hear, on the recorded call, the sound of notes being taken with a Sharpie to plan how to get what they want Jane to say? You've seen that in this trial, the lawyers passing notes to each other. Then Combs had DeRock reach out to Mia, asking her to say something. Mia told you her reaction to this call. She had seen the defendant bash in Cassie's head. DeRock had seen it too. He was asking her to agree with a lie. As the federal investigation grew, they kept reaching out to Mia. DeRock calls her 5 times in a row. The chart Ms. Sankar presented to you bring this together.
For those wondering, here's how Combs' family looks in the courtroom. Art courtesy to Inner City Press from Elizabeth Williams.
The defendant's conduct toward Mia is also obstruction and witness tampering. Also obstruction. The video of the intercontinental assault. It's bribery, but also obstruction. Finally, venue. We only have a show and act in this district. Doesn't have to be criminal. SDNY includes Manhattan and the Bronx. Count 2, freak-offs in Manhattan. Court 3, freak-offs, Jules to the London Hotel in Manhattan. Court 4, Jane in Manhattan. You spent 7 weeks listening. A lot of the evidence was hard to hear or see. You heard from Kid Cudi, whose house was broken into and whose car was burned. You heard from Regina Ventura, Deontay Nash, how he ran the enterprise with total control. It's time to hold him accountable. It's time to find him guilty.
And that was the end of the prosecution's closing argument, laying out their final case against Sean Diddy Combs. But the trial isn't over yet. Tomorrow, it's the defense's turn. They'll deliver their closing arguments, followed by a final rebuttal from the prosecution, and then the jury will begin deliberations. What do you think the verdict will be? Let us know your thoughts and predictions in the comments below. If you want complete coverage of tomorrow's arguments and the final verdict, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.